Hello, everybody, and welcome to the digital download. You're hosting, aren't you, Will? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm hosting today. Yeah, so look, lovely to see everybody here. I was the last one to arrive, which isn't great for the host, but lovely to be here with you all today for today's subject, which is all around learning and development. Which, as I was volunteered to be guest editor, and part of guest editing is you can choose a subject. I've happened selected one which is very close to my own heart. So we're going to have an hour's discussion around all kinds of learning and development training subjects. But just before we get going, let's do a quick round of introductions. And I'm going to start my top left, which is with Tim, the gaffer, and then we'll move across. So Tim, quick introduction, please.
Yes, I'm Tim Hughes. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite, and welcome everybody.
Great, thank you. Tara.
Hello, I'm Tara Argo, and I am with Crux and also a partner of DLA Ignite.
Adam, thank you, Tara.
Hi, I'm Adam Gray. I'm Tim's business partner, co-founder of DLA Ignite.
Lorena.
Hi, hello. I am Lorena Borgo. I'm based in Lima, Peru, and I am as an associate to DLA Ignite, and I have my own consultancy in legal marketing. We are rebranding, so the name will come in a few weeks.
Excellent. I can see we've got a rebranding subject in a couple of weeks' time that you can lead for us then. Lenwood, over to you.
Hello, I'm Linwood Ross. I'm based on just outside of New York City. I'm with Accelerate, and we are a partner of DLA Ignite.
Fantastic, thank you. Rob, over to you.
Good morning, all. I'm Rob Durant, founder of Flywheel Results. We're just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and I am a proud DLA partner.
Great, thank you for that. And I'm William Shorten, and I also am a colleague through DLA Ignite, and also run my own consultancy, which is focused on coaching, training, both design, delivery and facilitation. So wonderful to be with everybody here today. And with reason for picking this subject, apart from it being close to my heart, as I said, is that we're just entering that phase for those organizations and especially the L&D departments within learning and development departments within organizations, that kind of just after the midway point whereby they're looking towards the end of the year and they're seeing what they've got left in their budgets for training. And they're also in the stage of setting the budgets for the coming year. So we thought it would be a great opportunity today to talk about learning and development, to share some of our insight and our experience, and to have a catch up on that subject. So I thought we'd start off with just a really open question about what makes an effective training program.
Just a softball to start us off, right, Will?
Come on. You guys are all warmed up. I know it's still early for our North American colleagues, but I'm sure you've limbered up and you've already done your weight set this morning, Rob.
I was thinking about this ahead of the session, and I was thinking that certainly in my experience, the majority of companies that I've worked for have seen training in all of its forms largely as an interruption to business rather than something which is integral. And certainly the concept of career development has been something which has been completely outside of something they have seen as a positive thing. And I think that certainly from what I've seen, oftentimes the implementation of training, certainly in the larger companies that I've worked with, it feels like it's a punishment rather than a benefit. The training has generally been delivered in quite a dull, boring way. I've had corruption training, sexual harassment training. I mean, which sounds like it's setting me up to be.
Are you good at those now?
Yeah, it was in the past, and then he went to the training.
But I think that my point is that these were undertaken almost as if the sole purpose was to safeguard the organization from potential legal fallout by saying, we've trained you to do this. And actually what was devoid from the training was anything which was focused on genuine empowerment of the individuals. So, and I know some people have had a different experience to me from this perspective, but the training has been very technical, very compliance based, very legal based, not one. The idea of sending somebody on a Tony Robbins course to become their most authentic best self is like so far out of the ballpark for most of the organizations that I've had any interaction with, that I think that's the issue, isn't it? We do a lot of training, and when we're training, the thing that we have to overcome with the people that we're working with is exactly the training that you do every day, Will, which is about empowering people, helping them to have purpose, helping them to have belief, overcoming their self-limiting beliefs, one of your expressions, to become better people, better contributors to the organization, better focused. And I think that's things are moving in that direction now, but they've still got a long way to go, haven't they?
Can I just start off with a warm-up statement? Back in the corporate days, I worked in a large company. We had 66 salespeople. We had 7 of them that always made their number, usually by about 200%. And they were the people that generally made the number for the business. So one of the things that I did was that I wanted to say, what is it about these people that are different from everybody else? And I've written about it in many blogs, but there was a number of things that basically came out that made them different. One of them was that all of those 7 salespeople went on training. The people that didn't make their number all said, I don't have time for training.
I have a number to meet.
I've got a number to make. Yeah. And it was quite amazing to actually find that the people that were making their number and doing it well were the people that were actually, the company I worked at had an unlimited training budget, which was, we were very privileged to have that. But they were actually making use of the training resources within that business.
But did the company encourage people to do that? I mean, was it there? So if you were like a senior manager, was it there that you said, okay, there's a budget, you can get whatever training you want, or were people actively encouraged and pushed to do that training?
It was well known in the organization that the budget had never been cut. It was pretty much infinite. And if you had people working for you, you would always say when it came around for the objectives and the yearly review is what are you going to do around training? Where do you want to go? And the question, what do you want to do in 5 years' time? And where do you want to go? Okay, so your capability is here. You need to have this here. Okay, what's the gap, and how can we basically get that gap to close? And some people would step up and book those courses, and some people wouldn't. But it was pretty much if you were leading that organization, you would tell your people to get into that training budget. But there was a very clear difference. You would always see the people that would get on were the people that dipped into the budget.
Was the onus on the student to find the course and enroll and all of that?
Yeah.
Or was
Yeah, so
everything
was online. Even 8 years ago, 10 years ago, it was all online, and what it was a case of, look, you know where you want to go. There's the gap. What you need to bridge the gap. Okay, so what is it that you need? Go away and find it. So one guy came back and said, I want an MBA, and I said, yeah, okay. And so go out and find it. So he went to found that. He said, I'm going to do an MBA at Warwick. And he said, I've looked at it, and he said, you'll either pay 80% or sometimes you'll pay 100%. I said, well, let's ask for 100%, which was £20,000, which is what now about $25,000. So I just signed it off, and he got an MBA out from Warwick University, and we paid all the expenses to go up there. But he's someone that's actually done really well in the organization, and he went out and found it, and he took the training that's my experience.
And I think my experience was very similar in the instance that I worked in the largest industry in Oklahoma. So money was never an issue, but we were never encouraged to go out and find training. like, I mean, they weren't like, oh, we're going to do this sort of training. If I wanted to do something, I just went and said, hey, I want to learn this. Can I go? And they would
how was
always
that communicated to you? Because that's the thing.
only in my reviews, though.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Only in my reviews. And then I would say, oh, well, I really want to learn this. Would you be willing to pay for it? And they were always willing to do it, but there was never an encouragement to better themselves. And, you know, it was really interesting because none of my colleagues ever went out and found different opportunities. They were very much okay. And they never really wanted to go kind of outside of that box. And so that was really my experience, that it was there if you wanted to go out and figure out what was best for you.
I mean, I'm standing here because of some training that the company paid for me to go on. I went to my manager and said, I want to do a blogging course. And he said, how much is it? I think it was like £100, which is like $120. And he said, yeah, just put it on expenses. And it was there during that course that the person said, you need to be famous for something. And I sat there and I didn't know. And then all of a sudden the lightning bolt hit me and said, I'm going to be famous for social selling. And the rest is history, as they say. But it was me that said that I wanted it and then went out and got it.
Yeah, so interesting. I think that for most organizations, that the learning and development is really mostly compliance based, mostly, check the box. I'm not sure where the idea, somewhere there's this idea that, maybe once you graduate university, aside from the learning that you have to do for compliance purposes or your continuing education requirement for whatever your industry is, the learning stops.
That's a good point.
And so I'm not exactly sure where that comes from, but I certainly felt that way when I was in the legal profession, that, I really only needed to do the continuing legal education, and I really hated to do that. When I started to kind of get excited about work and life again is when I left the legal profession and I started to get back into the habit of learning that I had at university. Because when I was learning in university, it was like I couldn't wait to we had something called a blue book, where all the at the beginning of the semester, you get this blue book and it has all the courses in there, 2,000 some courses. And it was just going through that blue book and the curiosity of what can I learn next. And we also had a requirement in our university that there were 4 different groups and you had to have a certain number of credits in each group to graduate. So even if you were a political science or economics major, you were going to do some science. You had to do some science in school. So I'm not sure where that comes from, but where we need to go globally for everyone is get that learning really embedded into the organization as a strategic activity where what we're learning is meaningful and useful in our work. Because everyone talks about learning culture, but the reality is that business is moving so quickly. Things are changing so rapidly that you have to constantly be learning just to stay on top of what's happening in your subject matter area or in business generally. So I really think it's the speed of business that's making learning culture or learning and development, imperative to strategic focus.
I think it's really interesting what you said there, Lenwood, about, when you were in the formal education system, you got to the end of it and it's kind of like you dust yourself down and you say, right, it's time for me to go and do a real job now, go out and work and actually make my... And I think to a certain extent, the expectation in most people when they enter the workplace is that learning has finished, working has begun.
Yeah.
And you're right, the pace of change in the world, business specifically, is so fast now that every day is a learning day for every single one of us, And that needs to be an expectation which is set by everybody for new starters in the workplace. Because, from the day that they join school, there's school, then there's higher education maybe, and then there's work, and that's an entirely different thing. And actually, it isn't an entirely different thing. And the most value that you can bring is by continuing to learn and discover new things that you can bring back into the organization. But if you're not prepared for that, if you're not viewing your experience and your journey through that lens, those things just drift past, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely, Adam. I'm sorry. Let me just make this. I absolutely agree with that. I think actually that because of what we do, we're in the business of learning every day. This is something that I think is missed by, many executives who still don't have a full understanding of social media and how it can be used effectively in business. But every day we're out talking to the, potential customers, the talent that's out there. We're seeing what's happening in the market. And so that's why we're constantly learning, because there's this conversation that's happening on social media, particularly LinkedIn and Twitter, related to business that's 24/7. And you really need to be listening and engaging in that conversation. And when you're doing that, you're going to be learning and investigating, and your curiosity is going to increase.
Lorena,
Yes, I think there are some aspects that we have to consider when analyzing or we're talking about continuing education or learning at the organization. One point is, for example, I think organizations have been missing is the engagement with the people when offering, if the case, courses or continuing education or trainings in the organization, because it's like detached. The human resources area offers the courses, the people take them or don't take them, but there is no bond, there is no follow-up, there is no sharing it inside the organization and having very clear or being clear that we are having this because of our organization. This is one point. And the second point that is also important is I've seen that, and in some of in the organizations where I did work and afterwards now as a consultant, is this investment in people does not always reward the organization. And the worst is when these people or these go to the competence or leave the organization. So they have the feeling that they have invested the money, that they wasted the money. So I think there is from the human resources point of view and from the leaders of the organizations, they have to really put another view to what does it mean to train their people, and really to share that and to share this feeling. And the second thing is, no, actually this is the ones, and the second is, okay, you have to then to take care and to be, to be, I don't know how you say that, but say, okay, I'll invest, and if it works and he stays, okay, and he leaves, I can't do anything, no?
Absolutely, Lorena. I think it's a Richard Branson quote, isn't it? About what happens if we train people and they leave. What happens if we don't? So I think thank you. There's some really, because we asked what makes an effective training course, and the words I've picked out there is kind of empowerment and empowering people. A genuine empowerment to learn. And I'm minded of the quote from a guy called Josh Bursin, who, if you're interested in training, he's somebody who worked for Deloitte and set it up for himself. And he came up with this phrase, learning in the flow of work, which is all about, if you're doing training, if you're doing some form of learning, if you can then attach it to something you're doing in your day-to-day job, and it's going to help you to do that, by having that context, it's, it obviously increases the effectiveness of the training that you're going through. And then I think we've had several themes in the discussion already about kind of mindset. And I think it's the mindset of the individual, and it's the mindset of the organization. I think, any of us in the workforce today, we have to come in with a learning mindset. As you talked about, Lenwood, with the pace of change, the way things are changing, you need to be agile. You need to be at the cutting edge of knowing what's going on. So I think, to have that ability to have a kind of open mindset, and to be encouraged. This is the link back to the organization, where the organization will encourage self-led learning, gives people the opportunity to do that. And then from an organizational point of view, there was a lot written by Peter Senge, who, 20 years ago came up with the idea of the learning organization. He was building on kind of information. I think it was from some Japanese researchers who'd worked with Toyota, and how you bring continuous improvement into the workplace. And one of those was through continuous learning. And I think that ability for an organization to make sure that it has the right learning culture in place. In the organization I used to work for, we used to have a learning week. And one of the kind of taglines I came up for that was, I learn, I share, we learn.
Exactly.
And I think it's really at the kind of foundation of, if an organization as a whole is going to benefit, that kind of culture, that kind of feel has to be encouraged.
It does. Isn't the first challenge, though, to overcome letting people know that there is a culture of learning?
Right.
Because, the companies that I've worked at, some of them quite big companies, the challenge has been that oftentimes you don't know that there is a culture of learning, because, like you said, Lenwood, it happens at your annual review, or no, you, Tara, said it happens at your annual review, and it's like at this one point in the year, okay, there is a learning budget available, but actually, it requires, surely, for organizations, the people within the organization, to celebrate the idea of learning within the organization, and learning rather than training, because training carries all sorts of connotations around, you're going to learn how to use our tool, our process, our whatever, and learning is much broader than that, isn't it?
It is.
Absolutely.
So I saw,
Yeah, Rob.
I'm sorry, I dropped out. So if this is repeating information, I apologize. But Will, your initial question was, how do we know training is effective? And in my experience, I do a lot of sales training as well, but training in general is measured in one of two ways. Did we tick the box? Did we deliver the training? Or and this is particular to sales training, did the sellers come out and sell one more widget because of it? Ironically, the ticking the box part is very easy to measure and often gets done. And the selling one more widget part hardly ever gets attributed back to the training.
That's an
Yeah,
interesting point.
it's the nirvana of, I was told a long time before I went into training by a training organization, the nirvana is always, what's the return on investment, and how can you trace back, specific activities to the training that took place. And, if anybody happens to come up with that and find it, then, if you put a copyright or a trademark on it, then you'll be off to a very successful start in that arena.
One of the things that Satya Nadella said when he took over as CEO of Microsoft was that he needed to change the culture at Microsoft from know-it-all to learn-it-all. Like that was one of his primary goals. And he subsequently said that his job as the CEO is to create a culture where the people are enabled to accomplish all the things that they want to accomplish for themselves and for the business. I'm paraphrasing. But those two things are really, really forward thinking. More CEOs should really look at what he has done from a leadership perspective and how that has led to the transformation of Microsoft as an organization. Because, it's really hard to argue with their results. I mean, they were a on-premises Windows focused organization. Now, they're a leader in cloud in about an 8-year period, or 7 or 8 year period. And the results can be measured in the growth in the value of the Microsoft stock, which for a decade basically did nothing. And before Satya Nadella took over, people were counting Microsoft out, like they were behind the curve in cloud. And so it was really changing the culture, changing the people in the organization. That was what was needed to drive the organization forward. I just don't think that enough CEOs, there's so much focus on the technology. Plan next year is to spend globally $4.7 trillion on technology. And we know they're not spending anywhere near that on people.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really the people that are going to make the difference.
Yeah, and linking your comment to Adam's, it is the culture, and what that requires is leaders to demonstrate that they are lifelong learners. What that means for them to share that, and to build in the kind of symbols and rituals that underpin that within the culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have met only one, and now that you mention it, Will, is one managing partner of a legal boutique. It's a small firm, and I think they make almost 10 million for, here in Peru is a lot of money, 10 million a year. And he always told me, I am always taking courses, learning. And his organization is that way. They are the most technological here, Vinate Toyama. They have now data analytics, lawyers that work on data analytics, and because he's always learning and attending courses. And other firms where I used to work, for example, you never knew anything about what was happening outside of the building. So incredible, no? And it's not only my opinion. I met yesterday an associate that left recently from that firm, and he told, I left the firm and I discovered a new world from learning, what's happening on legal innovation, on legal tech, on different things. So it's very important what you mentioned, this learning culture inside the organization.
Yeah.
So how do businesses implement a learning culture? So, at one end of the spectrum, we've got Microsoft. Microsoft is a huge global leviathan with incredibly deep pockets. So Microsoft can say, you can have whatever training you want, guys, help yourself. Here's a catalog, go and book anything. And if it's not in the catalog, we'll add it to the catalog if you want it. And they're large enough that the whole kind of what happens if we train people and they leave thing is not an issue for them, because if 1 or 10 or 100 staff leave, it doesn't matter. But a lot of the times, we're seeing smaller organizations of 1,000 or less, that are genuinely in trouble. They've got a core of people that have fallen out of love with the organization. The organization isn't performing very well. They haven't got those deep pockets. And the leaving of 2 or 3 key members of staff could be a real significant blow to the business. So how do they start to implement that Satya Nadella policy and vision that they know is the right thing to do, but in a way that they can literally do it rather than just dream about doing it?
So I think especially in the examples, or the example you've taken there, it's all about small steps, Adam, and it's all about trying to start up a kind of social learning. So those small steps, and I did it for a while. One of the teams that I was managing was that we'd have a monthly meeting, and at the end of the monthly meeting, because we were working in a learning and development department, I'd always share what I'd learned over the course of that month. So whether it was an article that I'd read, a book that I'd read, or a course that I'd been on, a MOOC, one of these massive open online courses that you get on platforms like Coursera, I'd share what I'd learned through that. And I'd encourage other people within the team, obviously, to talk about what they learnt as well. And it doesn't necessarily, I think, especially at the start, it doesn't have to be focused on business, just anything. So if you've got a passion, for guitars, or you've got a passion for motorcycle driving or something like that, share what you've learned there, because it's all about trying to pump prime the system in order to get people talking and thinking differently.
Right.
So I'd start small and try to get those kind of interactions, and then if your organization happens to be big enough that it's got some kind of platform, a communications platform, then how can you get people to start posting on that again what they've learned, and perhaps to make that more business orientated. So in particular, there was a conversation that I was having with a colleague, and they were telling me about this, which I didn't know before. So it was a genuine learning experience for me there. I followed that up because I went and looked at such and such website, and I found this. So then how can you kind of share that broader throughout the organization? And you're kind of role modeling these behaviors that you want people to adopt and to implement.
So there will always be a question about money, Will. And there will always be that question around what are we getting back from this? So what would your advice be? Because there's small. If you're a small business, spending a couple of $1,000 on a course is a lot of money. So what? How do you get the culture?
So culture's culture. I mean, in lots of different areas, we all have problems, or there are challenges with implementing a culture of this or that. So I think an organization really, it's going back to some of the basics. What's our purpose here? How are we going to achieve that purpose? And how can learning support us to achieve that purpose? And, that's then your kind of foundation. And then depending on what your budget, your context and everything else, then you start to work out, well, what have we got to put in place in order for that to happen? And it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to go out and get everybody enrolled on a big ticket course. It might be that you're starting to encourage social learning. There is a wealth, we all know, because we're on LinkedIn. So we know that on LinkedIn, just in terms of what people are posting, there's a lot of information there. There's LinkedIn Learning that we all have access to. So you've got ready-made courses that you can access on LinkedIn if you're already a premium member. You've got YouTube, you've got, people like McKinsey or Deloitte who have their own kind of platforms where they'll share content about any, you go on and you say, I'm interested in supply chain, I'm interested in management theory. All of that already exists. So rather than going out and saying, okay, well, we've got to get people on a course, or we've got to acquire a brand new learning platform, I would kind of map out and see what exists, within your kind of environment to start off with, and look at ways that you can leverage that.
Tim, while you're right, it is all about money. It doesn't have to be. There are a number of free resources out there, but just telling your people, hey, go find it, go do it, isn't enough. You can facilitate something. You can say, hey, we're going to do a 90-minute lunch and learn every Thursday. We're going to sit together, even together virtually, and go through this free online course, but doing it together and facilitating it sets a different expectation than just go do it.
Yeah,
it can
no
be
doubt
done
about
without
that.
money.
No doubt about that. Learning together is critically important. And the interesting thing is that when Satya Nadella, set out this goal of transforming Microsoft through learning, they did not have a tool to accomplish that in an organization with 170,000 people.
Microsoft Teams couldn't do it?
Huh?
Microsoft Teams couldn't do it?
Microsoft Teams didn't exist.
Oh, okay.
What they did actually is they actually needed to develop the platform. They needed to build what would be needed. And they worked with some learning and development experts, and they built a platform to meet the needs of large organizations in their mission critical training, where it's applying what you're learning in your work, and it's social learning, and it's robust and at scale. And that platform is Intrepid Learning. That's the platform that they developed. So that also happens to be the platform that we use at Accelerate. So sometimes when we want to do things, we have to maybe, I'm not saying that small organizations need to build the tools, but my point is even large organizations that have tremendous resources don't always have the tool that they need to accomplish what they want to accomplish. And that's really what the story is about.
I'm going to push back a little bit there, Lenwood. You're not wrong. I mean, there's always a better way of doing things, but starting is much better than waiting for the best tool to do it.
And that actually, I don't think you're saying anything different than what I'm saying. Microsoft started with the training. The very first thing he did was have his leadership team read a book called Nonviolent Communication. Tim knows about that book. I recommended it to him. Excellent book. That's what then they moved to growth mindset. But the challenge for an organization that size is, how do you get this organization to move quickly, change direction quickly? Because and this is kind of going back to the original statement, or the original thing that we were talking about, is we've got to move learning and development from the periphery and embed it into the core of what we're doing. Because most organizations are way behind in their people transformation. They're not prioritizing people transformation. They're prioritizing the technical transformation, implementing new systems and automation. And those things are critically important to a digital transformation. But if you leave the people out, ultimately your transformation will fail, because they will not have the skills that they need to move the organization forward. It's the people that are moving the organization forward, not the technology.
There's a product called Learnerbee, which is my partner's son's used to be in there. He's actually just resigned. And what they do is, it's a platform. It's not actually a learning. It doesn't have courses on itself. What they do is they pull courses from different places, and it is they're mainly selling to small business and startups. And what happens is that these startups and small businesses, as part of the package that people have when they join, certain number of days holiday and things like that. What they do is that they have equivalent of £2,000, so about $2,500 of training. And what they do is that they go and they can go into this platform and get equivalent of $2,500 worth of training. And we've had people come to us who work for organizations where they see that they have $2,500 of a training budget in their terms and conditions, and they've actually come to us and spent that with us on an individual basis. So that's kind of like when you were talking about the first step and the culture, that Learnerbee is kind of like that first step. But there's also that realization in startups that nowadays, if you want to attract people, you need to be offering training.
Great. Look, thank you everybody for I think we've really gone into depth. I think consensus about what possible there and what does make effective training.
Can I just say, Will? Sorry, can I just butt in and say, just to everybody watching, we think the chat is down. I think the chat is down, certainly on my LinkedIn profile. If you're putting in comments on my LinkedIn profile, they're not coming through. So if you could try switching to either Adam or Will or Lenwood, and because Lenwood's been able to put a comment through and it's come through. So I just wanted to say, if you're putting comments through on my LinkedIn profile, sorry, it's not coming through and I can't do it. Sorry, Will.
No problem. So we've been looking kind of in the rearview mirror about, you know, some of our own
Thanks, Mark, for
experiences.
testing it.
What makes effective. Thank you, Mark. What makes effective training? We're all in this sphere, so we're all talking to organizations. What are the kind of things that we're hearing, you know, ahead of next year? Perhaps people are already putting budgets in place for 2023. And I know that a lot of us have a kind of specific area that we're looking at in training. But what are the kind of themes that you think and you're hearing from people that they need support on going into next year?
Not so much a theme, but the timing was perfect. This morning, a sales enablement colleague of mine had sent me a message on LinkedIn and said, Rob, what do you have in your playbook for a cadence of sales training? And I scratched my head and thought, damn, I teach cadences for sales messaging. But as a trainer, I've never developed a cadence of my own. And I attributed that to the trainings that I've done have really been with small organizations and all live and in person, and we're interacting with them day in and day out. But for a distributed team, a distributed training, it made perfect sense to me. So, of course, when you have a question, you go to the Google machine. And if you try and Google training cadence, the only results you get are cadence trainings. There was nothing I could find that really said this is a good way to reinforce the message. So together we came up with something pretty quickly. We said big chunks and little snippets and mnemonics through the various media that your teams are already using. The timelines and content, you know, TBD really should be customized. But the one thing that we really honed in on that I believe gets overlooked, even for those that are doing the repetition to build recognition, whatever message the sales enablement, the training team is putting out, that needs to be echoed 10 times more frequently by the frontline sales managers, because they're the ones day in and day out that have the most influence on whether or not a training is successful. I just found it ironic that came up this morning when this is today's topic.
It's not necessarily cadence, but if you, and there's a lot of people in learning and development who don't like it, but I think it's called the Ebbinghaus curve, which is basically if you receive information and training, there's a kind of timeline that within 48 hours or a week or whatever, you know, you start to lose what you've been taught. So it may well be that that's something that you can kind of link into that area as well, Rob.
I'll share that with them. Thank you.
Who else? What else are we hearing from organizations ahead of next year?
Well, certainly the organizations that I'm talking to, they have a number of very specific pain points at the moment. And I don't actually, in fairness, have many conversations with people in L&D departments. But I would imagine that the organization is scrambling around trying to solve those specific problems. So, you know, that's visibility, getting seen in the marketplace, because you can't just keep spending more money on promoting your business because, you know, what's an impression worth? Credibility, you know, content that people are actually going to read and believe rather than just be the same words that everybody else is using or a different color scheme or whatever. Sales, revenue, pipeline, conversations, all of those sales indicators. Recruiting good staff, becoming the employer of choice. You know, it's what we hear, or what I hear, is that talented people get a certain way down the recruitment process within organizations, and then they say, actually, I've got a job somewhere else, and they leave. And obviously that's a huge amount of cost in terms of going through the recruitment process and time, but also it encourages the organization to get into a bidding war. So if you've got a budget of 50,000 or 100,000 or $250,000 or whatever, they've probably gone somewhere else because they're being paid more, and therefore you have to pay more still. So the way around that is obviously to become somewhere that they want to work rather than they can work. And then lastly, retaining people and making them feel that they're part of something, because all of us, we're sitting at home in our spare bedrooms. And that's what the working world looks like for the majority of people. It's all very well saying, I've got a McKinsey sweatshirt or whatever, because that's the company that I work for, not picking on McKinsey. But actually, if your experience of work is walking from your kitchen to your home office, spending 8 hours in there and then walking back to the kitchen, actually, you don't feel that you're part of a team. So addressing those problems in whatever format that takes, and it may be that from a training perspective, that last one is tackled by that online collaboration thing. But the other things are very specific pain points for businesses. And I would imagine that they're going to be wanting to invest money in training people to solve those specific problems. It's nice that you've got a purpose and that you're developing your career, but actually we're out of business tomorrow. So let's tackle that problem first.
Yeah, that's a great point, Adam. And it's something that I don't think is focused on enough, which is actually the training or the enablement that goes on for organizational advancement, as opposed to, personal development or career advancement. Those are very different things. And when we leave it to the individual, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm just saying that I actually don't think there's enough money going into the training and development of people overall. But when we just leave it to people to go and, select their course for development, they might select something that's technical. They might select something that is, for their career advancement, or they might select something that is, for their personal development. Three different issues. What the organization needs to focus on is, what do we need to learn as an organization for this organization to advance? There are certain skills that we all need to have for this new digital economy, and we need to be focused on that from a strategic perspective. So that doesn't mean we do it all across the organization at the same time, but again, it's an embedded learning that's happening for strategic purposes.
Yeah, if you're a salesperson and your career is in sales, any sales training is well worth you having, because it helps you further your career. That's true. Of an organization, the benefit I get is that if you're better at selling, you're going to sell more stuff for my organization whilst you're in tenure here, which is great. The problem with the technical training is it makes you better at being able to describe what your products and services do and how they operate. But does that actually help tackle any of those fundamental problems organizations are facing at the moment? Arguably not. If you become empowered and have a purpose, does that help the organization solve that? Well, if you're the leader, arguably yes. If you're a frontline salesperson or a marketer, probably not. So actually, with organizations, ultimately, you have to be here to reap the benefits of the investment you make in your people. So the first priority should be, shouldn't it, as a question rather than a statement, should be to make sure that you're here tomorrow.
Adam and I work for an organization where they would have said that took place, because we would be flown, everyone would be flown to Amsterdam. We'd be put in a big conference center over 2 days, and then we'd have person after person giving PowerPoint presentations to us with the training that we needed to know. And so,
did you learn anything from that?
No, the non.
He likes Amsterdam.
That's where the Ebbinghaus effect.
The non-politically correct term is it's a sheep dip, which is they took everybody and they dipped them in the. But I'm not sure. Even and we go back to ticking the box. I think there was a number of boxes ticked. I'm not sure that necessarily anybody learned anything. And by the way, any expenses that were raised during in Amsterdam, you weren't allowed to claim them. Just so I'll put that in.
Interestingly, actually, I would say probably most of the learning went on over the bar at the end of the day or at the break time, rather than during the
it was a great place for networking and meeting up with people
and team building. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we hung out as a team when we were there, and we were more together because we seldom spent all of the time together day after day. So it was very good from that perspective. But yeah, in terms of what I learned, nothing at all. My boss actually said, "We don't need to sit through this presentation. Let's go outside and do some work in the lobby." You know, and it was so good from a team perspective, not good from a learning perspective, really.
So we just have to be careful, Lenwood, in terms of doing that, but expectation and the way of going about it. So I totally agree with you. It's just about making sure it's executed in a particular way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, actually, that is where I was going to go next, which is that it's not just about what you're learning, but also how you're learning. What process are you using for that learning? And so I think that there are a number of tools. I won't plug what we're doing, but there are a number of tools that improve the process of learning, so that you're getting higher engagement, you're getting more learning, you're getting the social thing that's happening, and it's also being applied in your work. And that's why you retain that information over the experience, and it becomes something that you move, that just becomes part of what you're doing in your job. That's why that process is so important, because you don't want to have what you just described, which is we spend, you know, this buttload, but I meant to say boat.
It would have been millions of dollars. Yeah.
This boatload of money, you know, for everyone to go to Amsterdam, and people are saying, well, did I really learn anything? So,
I have a quick story on that. One of my colleagues had decided she really wanted to attend this event, learning opportunity. And the chairman of our board said, "We will pay for it, but when you return, you need to write a report, and then you need to tell me what you learned."
Yeah.
And she never forgot that. And I thought that's such an interesting way to do it. But that was kind of his stipulation. Like, if we're going to spend this kind of money, then you need to write that report, and then you need to explain to me how beneficial it was.
And I think that's really good. I've seen that before as well, Tara. You know?
Yeah, I had never seen it before, but I thought that's pretty fascinating.
I used to work for the administration here in Peru, and I have also worked for the private sector. And always people, professionals that work, that are not officers at the public administration, they say, if you have this experience with it's good to work some time of your life for the administration, because they invest a lot in training for their people, and that doesn't happen in the private sector. I don't know if it's the same in UK or Canada, where you are, Tara, but why is it? And it happens what you say, Tara. When we were trained, we had to write reports, we had to share the information, and that didn't happen in the private companies where I also have worked. So I think we have to learn, or private sector has to learn something from the public sector. Do you agree?
Absolutely. So we've got about 5 minutes left, and I just wanted, because we're all in some form of training or learning, I just wanted to go around and for everybody to give a tip in terms of, you know, when you're running a course, facilitating, what's something that you've learned and something that you can pass on to others.
But for me, Will, and
this is I'm glad you scrabbled around. Your face was a bit blank at one moment.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to get in first as well, because otherwise everyone else will pick the one I wanted to do. Totally selfish. Sorry. It's something that you taught me, which is that, and I'm sure that you said that there's some learning and development best practice or something, that within 10 minutes of the course or the training starting, that there has to be an exercise. And I've sat in training myself, and I know what it's like. 10 minutes in, you're sitting there going, what am I going to do this evening? Oh yeah, I've got to go and get the shopping. So do I get, and your mind wanders. And it's just so fantastic at seeing you pulling the people back. You're getting them to do a task, a mission, and they're going away. And then they're like, it's just brilliant. Sorry, that's the thing that I would share.
Yeah,
not so much a practical tip to implement, but some wisdom my dad shared with me when I formally went into teaching. Now, he's taught in public schools for over 50 years now. And he said to me, Rob, I contend that if no learning took place, then no teaching took place either. And I keep that in mind with everything that I deliver. It's about the audience and it's about what they are learning.
That's great.
What I learned the hard way is that what I say and what you hear are not necessarily the same thing. And when we started the business, invariably what would happen was that I would deliver the training and Tim would sit in the audience and watch the faces of everybody around the table. And then we would have a debrief afterwards. And he would say, this bit, they laughed. This bit, they didn't understand a word you said. And it's not about making sure that you've got the best words and the best delivery. It's about making sure that people hear what it is that is the message. And I think that a lot of the challenge that we have is that as the trainer, stroke expert, stroke coach, we are the expert, and they often have the learner has a very different frame of reference. So we cannot make any assumptions about what they know and what they don't know. And the only way that we can prove it out is by doing it, seeing if it works, and then if it doesn't, take that on the chin and do better next time.
Yeah, something that one of my mentors shared with me that has stuck with me is that learning is one thing. When we read a book or we read an article, we're learning something. But growth happens from doing. It happens from applying what you learn. So that's really critically important. If you want to actually grow, you've got to take that thing that you learned and you have to apply it. And so someone else said, it's better to read one book a month and apply everything you're learning from those books or some portion of it than to read 52 books in a year and apply nothing.
That's a great point as well.
I would probably say, well, there's several, but whenever we go into any sort of learning or training, I always really encourage people to just listen, right? There are several perspectives that you will hear when you are in a learning capacity. And although you may not agree with them, you can still listen and take bits and pieces to form your opinions and your views of things. So I'm always saying be very, very open. And another thing, of course, I taught oil and gas here in Oklahoma, but one thing is that I noticed whenever I did a lot of education is that people would just jump right into the meat, and they didn't realize that the people were way back here, right? Mm-hmm. And so I would always say, you've got to start at the beginning. You can't start right here in the very, very middle. So if we're facilitators, we have to remember that. And I think, Adam, you said it, is that, oftentimes when we go into those trainings, they may be way back here. And so we need to realize who our audience is and be very, very self-aware when we're teaching and training.
Even more challenging is they're not all starting at the same point.
Exactly. That's why that whole piece, when you're watching their face and their mannerisms, you can kind of pick up of where kind of people are. But I try to always start at the very beginning of whatever the subject matter is, just to kind of bring them up to speed, and that's been really, really helpful for me.
Thanks, Tara.
What I do, for example, when I train people are two things. The first is that they have to, what you said, Tara, to be really open, to open their mind. But I said always open also your heart, because it's both things that you need. And the second is to make them feel really confident that they will really learn something new that they will be able to implement, and that's to feel that both things, open and confidence.
Brilliant, Lorena. Thank you for that. Yeah, Adam, when you were talking about that in communication, I remember a line. It's from the book "Surrounded by Idiots" by John Erickson, and he, very early on in that, comes up with a great line, which I think I've said several times before, but it's communication is always done on the listener's terms.
Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah.
which is really what it's all about. So and it's that part of assuming just because we've said something and it's very logical and well thought
To
through
us.
in our mind
Yeah.
to us, it's not going to land that way to others. But I think my kind of closing thought was around when we do deliver training, most of us have some kind of plan that we stick to where we've kind of timed out which each bit is going to take. And I think when you start to go into training, you're very focused. I must stay on plan. I must stay on plan. It's 3:10. I've got to be at this point. I've got to be at this point. And actually, as with most things, as you get a bit more experience, then you have that opportunity to kind of be a bit more flexible and understand, actually, to come back to the point, you've got to react to where your learners want to be and what they want, and that you've got to adapt your plan and be flexible as you go through. I know we've got a couple of people who've got to leave, so we're kind of finished on the hour. Thanks very much indeed, everybody.
Thank you, Will.
Thanks, Will.
Yes, thank you.
That was wonderful.
Thank you, everyone.
No problem at all. Look, have a great end of the day, great weekend when you get there, and look forward to catching up on one of these in the near future.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks a lot.